LUIS is short for Language Understanding Intelligence Service. And if you look at how we've used computers in the past, basically it's been a progression starting from the lower left going all the way up to the upper right. How many remember what this is? Punch cards, right? We've seen them at museums. Some of us have actually used them. And then we've seen the progression, obviously, into the keyboard. And then we've seen touch interfaces. And now it brings us to this area where we're actually talking to our machines. So with LUIS, it's built on interactive machine learning that Microsoft has developed as part of the cognitive services. And what it does is it uses a language model that we have to train. And once it's trained, then it's able to identify the intentions of a user. And we do that simply by publishing to a REST API endpoint. So once we get everything set up, we'll have an API endpoint. We call that, submit our text that we want to have LUIS dissect, and then it will get a response back to us. So it accepts a text string as user input, and then it returns only parts that the developer interacts with, being a JSON format data set. So essentially with LUIS, basically, I have various utterances, and what an utterance is, it's another word for a sentence. So my user will utter or create a sentence, they will submit it, it'll send it to the processing, which is up in the cloud, using the API call. What I get back is JSON, similar to what we see here over on the right-hand side. And the JSON will tell me what the intent is, and how confident LUIS is in that intent being correct. So with language models, they're specific to the LUIS app, and you will see in a moment where I will create a language model, and it'll be tied only to my account and to my specific application. And it forms the basis of what the user is intending on doing or what they need. For example, I'm a huge car buff, and so all my examples are built around cars. And so if I walk into a car dealership and I say, I want to buy a car, do you have a silver Mustang in stock? Can you sell me a vehicle? All these three sentences or utterances, they have the same intention. And that intention is that I want to buy a car, right? And if you notice, all the three sentences, they all have the noun and the verb not necessarily in the same order. I'm not specifying the word buy. I'm not specifying purchase in every sentence, but rather it gathers that the intention of the user is to buy a car. And so there are three core parts to the language model. There is the intent, which can be looked at as the verb. In my case, it's buy car. The utterance, which is the complete sentence. And in this case, the example is, I want to buy a Mustang. So looking at that sentence, as with every proper sentence in the English language, it has a noun, it has a verb, sometimes it has an adjective, right? So the verb here is to buy, and then the noun is Mustang. It's a very nice noun. Any Mustang fans here? All right. So utterance is equivalent to a sentence, an intent is equivalent to a verb, and then an entity is equivalent to a noun. What is it that I intend on doing for what? My intention is to buy a car, and the entity is a Mustang or an Explorer or what have you. And so the result that I get back from LUIS is JSON very similar to this. First, it tells me what the query is that I submitted, which is I want to buy a Mustang. And then it tells me what my user's intent is. And the intent is buy car, as I have set it up in my model. And then it gives me a score that it's 99.99995% confident that this is the right answer. And the reason it's such a high confidence rate is after training it several times, that intent or the score had become high, and so it picked up on it that my intention is to buy a car. And then it gives me some additional JSON that goes along with it. All the various intentions. So it breaks it down for me, the intention versus the entities. And then within the entity, you'll notice that it specifies Mustang in the sentence. And then it tells me that that entity is in this sentence. It gives me the start index and the end index of that entity. Any questions so far? clear as a whistle, or we just haven't had enough coffee yet? Oh, no way. Gosh. You're on your own. Yes, I'll be going through that in a minute. Okay, so for building a Lewis app, and I'm only doing it only because Dennis pressured me to do it. So to build a Lewis app, first thing I need to do is create an Azure account. And if for those of you that do not have an Azure account, you can easily create a free one by going to azure.com and signing up for a free Azure account on the spot. Once I create my account, the next thing I need to do is go to lewis.ai, which is a different website altogether. And that's where the engine for the API for Lewis is housed. And then from there, I add in my intent, which is to buy a car. I set up my utterances and my entity. And then from there, I just simply train my model, and then I test it. The key thing is, after I'm done training it and testing it, some people forget to do the last step, publish. Okay? So you'll see, okay, I just tested it, it's working. Why is it that I'm not seeing the result in my application? So the key is to publish. And so with that, we'll jump into a demo. And so what's the first thing I need to do? Create an account on Azure. And so that's what I did here. And then after I create an account on Azure, I need to specify that I'm going to be using cognitive services. So I go to my cognitive services, and I select that it's going to be a language understanding service. And if I don't find it here, I can search for it. And there it is. And then I would simply select create, but I already have one created, so let me back out of here. And so I called mine Test Lewis. Essentially, after you create it, you're going to be given a set of keys and an endpoint to utilize. So there is my endpoint, and there is the key that I'll be utilizing. And we'll touch on those in just a little bit. Now, I take what I have learned here, or what I had set up in my Azure account. I go over to lewis.ai, and then from here, I create an application. And as you see, I created many apps here, and every app is its own independent model operating separately. So let's say that I can have several clients under here, one for a car dealer, one for a clothing retailer, one for, I don't know, a big box store, for example. And they're all separate models. They're not going to be intertwined. They're all running separately. So for my scenario, I created Test Lewis App 2. And immediately it gives me the dashboard of where it's been utilized. And more importantly, I can click on builds, and then here I see that I can set up entities, intents, and so here's my intents, and my intent is to buy a car. There's also another intent called find car, and if you look at find car, I have several utterances that I put in underneath. Granted, this is not the typical thing that most users would say. I'm here to fetch a car, right? Nobody ever says that. But nonetheless, I wanted to cover all the bases, and so I put it in and I trained it. So when a user comes in and says, I'm looking for a car, it has a score of 0.89. If someone types in find a Mustang, it comes back with a score of 0.85. I'm sorry? Do you get the score? No, you train it and then it increases the score. And so once I have my intents put in, now I can identify the entities. And the entities are essentially nouns or adjectives. So the noun in this case would be a car or a Mustang. And you'll see that it says type simple. We'll talk about that in an upcoming slide. And then we have color. So if I want a red Mustang or a silver Explorer, it can differentiate between the two. And so taking that, once that's done, I can go into my Manage App. And then every application is going to have an application ID as stated here. and then I can train my model. And then I can test it all using the portal. So I can say I want to purchase a vehicle. And so that comes back with a different intent. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Now, I already have my intents set up. And if I go back to build, there is buy car, find car. What's another thing I could do at a dealership? I can have my car serviced, right? So I have service car with 4 different utterances. I would like to service my car. I want an oil change, service a red Mustang. And so there it sees that if I was to define a color here, this would be the adjective, and this would be the noun or the entity. And so seeing this at work, here's my application. Basically, it's a .NET application, Windows Forms, and taking a look at the UI, pretty intense, huh? So we have a text box that the user is going to enter text here, search, which will execute that, and then we have the results that will be displayed in the window here. So in my code, in my button search click, I have a breakpoint at button search click, and what this is going to do, it's going to call the asynchronous method of Lewis parse. And why is it asynchronous? Sorry? I'm calling an API, and I don't know when that API is going to respond. Therefore, it has to be an asynchronous call. And so in my async call, I have my URI, which I've established. So there, this is the region that my machine or my Lewis is housed and that I'll be accessing. And there are 13 different locations that you can use for Lewis. And then I specify Lewis and the version number and the app, and then followed by the app key. Pardon me. Followed by the app key here. And then followed by the subscription key and the rest of the URI. And we'll see that in action in just a moment. And so I'll go ahead and hit start. So in the kiosk, it says, "What can I do for you today?" Folks in the back, can you see that okay? Okay. So we'll magnify it a little bit. Okay. So I just simply state, find the Mustang. And I click search. And then looking at my code, it's going to make the API call. Let's take a look at what that API call is. So here's my URI. And we'll copy that. And we'll paste it in here. So once again, when we dissect it, we have the region of Azure that I will be targeting. I'm specifying the Lewis API and the app ID. And let me zoom in again. And then that is followed by a subscription key for my Azure service. And then we see this parameter for verbose set to true. Time zone offset is 0. And then the query stated by the queue is find a Mustang. I'll delete that end quotes. So I make an API call, And what I did is I intentionally did it in the browser. Now, of course, this is not what I consider a rich customer experience, right? But I'm doing this so we can dissect the JSON, and it's visible so you can see what's going on behind the scenes. So I get this JSON back, and it's telling me the query that I sent is find a Mustang. The top scoring intent is find car. So as I had set it up, find a Mustang falls under find car. This is all in the Lewis portal that I had set up a few minutes ago. It tells me the score, 81% confidence that this is the right intent. And then it breaks it down for me. Because I set verbose to true, it gives me all the other intentions that I have and how confident it is in those intentions being correct. So, in other words, find a Mustang, it's 81% confident that it's under this intention. Find a Mustang is different than find a colored car, and so therefore this is only 5% confident. And so on with service a car, it's only 3% confident, and the score just continues to go down. So the highest scoring intent is listed up on top, and then when I set verbose equals to true, it gives me all the other intentions, and I can dissect that in the JSON object as I want. And so going back to our code where we still have the breakpoint, now we're going to look at the output. And because it's JSON, all I'm concerned with is basically the top intent. So I'm looking at the 0 element, or the first element inside that array. And then from there, when it comes back, so essentially when it comes back, I can query or take a look at that JSON object, find out what the top intent is, which is essentially the element is the first element in the JSON array, and then be able to identify, is it find car, service car, and in the case that it's none, I would just simply specify to the user, please rephrase, I didn't understand you. Okay. Now looking back at our API call, again, here it is with verbose. If I take that same URI and I put it in here, and I change that parameter to false, since it's not verbose, it just gives me the top intent and the score, and that's it. So depending on, do I want to parse the JSON object, find out where it's less confident in the other intents or not, I can choose to do that by using verbose equals to true, or if I just want the top one, I can look at it, set verbose equals to false. Sorry, I can barely hear you. Well, I'll give you the ubiquitous answer. It depends, right? So it depends on the number of intents that it could be sending back with the various confidence scores. Obviously, if it's just the top intent, it's going to return faster. But how much slower is it if I set it verbose equals to true? It depends on the number of intents that I have. Because now it has to look at all the different scores, tally those up, and put them into a JSON object. Sorry? Not necessarily. If you find out the highest intents, then if it's, I mean, like for this one, it's 81%. So obviously, anything other than that is going to be 19% or lower, right? Yeah, I see what you're saying, but again, it doesn't have to package that up into JSON and send it back. So once we've arrived at that high score, yeah. In this case, it's a few bytes, but depending on your app and how many intents you have, does that answer your question? And so we see here that we have find car, find color car, service car, and so on. And if I look over in my Lewis application, if I go over into my app, there we see under the Test Lewis app 2, which is the name of my application, here are all the different intentions that I have. No. Yes, sir. So it depends on the utterances, and it's just like everything else, you have to train it. So it would involve a lot of testing and a lot of essentially rinse and repeat. And what I mean by that is, so here again, I'm in my Lewis portal, and I'm looking at the intent for buying a car. Right. And so if we type in, I want to purchase a vehicle. First, got to spell it right. So it's coming back as a score of 0.05%. Now I can set this So now I can reassign the intent of that. I want to purchase a vehicle, and I want to set it to buy a car. And then I would train the model. And now that I've trained it and I've set it that this is the intent, that when a user says I want to purchase a car, that their intention is buy car, you'll notice that now my score has increased from 5% to 90%. Okay. Now, what's the next thing that I need to do after I train my model? Publish it. And so after I've trained it, I click on the publish, and there are two ways of doing it. I can do it for staging, where it keeps it at a hidden URL, or I can set it to production, where now it's accessible. And now this is going to take a minute, and it says publishing complete. Refer to the list of endpoints to access your endpoint URL. And so looking at here are my endpoints, and we'll see that the entire URL, again, the region that I'm targeting, and then I have my primary key, and there's also the key for my application that I set up in Azure. So all that is comprised inside the URI when I make the call. Now when I submit the query again, let's go to this window, and we'll say, instead of find the Mustang, I want to purchase, keep misspelling. Okay, I want to purchase a car, came back at 72. I said I wanted to purchase a vehicle, right? So let's change that. And there it comes back with a top scoring intent of 90%. Likewise, if we look at our endpoints, and more specifically, if we drill down into our intents, we go into Lewis. So I want to purchase a vehicle and I want to buy a car. These are already set as intents in there. Now, what if I was to say I want to purchase a car? Different words, but it gathered from the intention and how I trained it that I want to purchase a car is the intent that I want to buy a car. And so it came back with a confidence score of 62%. So I forgot who asked that question earlier. So how does it know exactly which phrases and how do you know when is enough? Essentially, you have to go through a variety of different phrases and train it. Yes, sir. Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And Sam is not really a good typist, by the way. You noticed that I misspelled purchase several times. So what can I do to remedy that problem? Sorry? I could put it in there as a result, but how many different ways can I misspell purchase? How many different ways can I misspell car? Right? There's a variety of different ways. The point is, I can use one of the other services to actually piggyback on this and do automated spell checker. And more than that, suggestions and corrections. Yes, sir. Okay, so after I publish my application, right. So that's the URL that's provided for you. What I'm saying is that it's comprised of several things. And let me paste this into the world's best editor. So the subscription key, you'll notice that mine ends with EBC6, right? And that I found, this is my Azure key. Okay. So first of all, it automatically built it for me. As you see, after I published it, it gave me the endpoint right here. That's the URL that I would use. It's telling you specifically what it is, right? Right, and so that's where the same URI that I have here, I just simply broke it down so you can see all the different parts. You're very welcome. And there it is right here. String URI. I can't type and I can't even highlight here. Okay, while we're waiting for Visual Studio to get untangled, that's essentially what it is. It's just that entire screen. You had a question over here? Yeah. So there is, and you can utilize that. And essentially, that's actually part of Lewis. I mean, you're not specifying the exact phrases. You're just simply training it enough, and it will automatically pick that up. Okay. But going back to the previous slide, there you see there's a ton of services under language. There's also translation, there's spell check. So all these are tied in together and you can utilize these services. In addition, something I'll mention later, you can also utilize under speech and do speech to text. So now I don't have to necessarily type into my app. I can talk into it. It'll convert that speech into text and then continue on, publish it to Lewis. Or send it to Lewis, I should say. How's that for a long answer? All right, very good. Matt, question? Yeah, that's actually what I showed earlier, but we'll go through it again. No problem. It's all good. So if I go back to my build, and here's my intention. So I have buy car, I want to purchase a vehicle. So no, okay, so this is a list of the utterances that are tied specifically to that intent. Okay. Oh yeah. There is. It's listed in here in the dashboard somewhere, but I can't find it off the top. Let me get back to you afterwards later today, and I'll show you where it's at. But yeah, it'll essentially produce a list of all the different intents that didn't hit. So this way you can monitor it and then retrain it on the fly. Okay? Yes, sir. Sure. So you're saying that I would do auto-suggest based on the utterances that I already have pre-programmed? Oh, batch testing? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is essentially batch. So that's batch testing, and you can essentially assign intents to it for that utterance. Yeah, so you can do that programmatically. Sure. I'll have to dig around for it. So that's another one that I'll be getting back to you again. Oh, there we go. Dennis, what would I do without you? And so here you can select import the data sets, and then here it gives you a link where you can specify in JSON and the syntax that it's going to be. So you can specify, for example, for a specific text and what the intent is going to be, and then you can essentially import that data set directly into that app. I hate it when things are hidden like that, but keep Dennis around. He'll always help out with that. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah, this is on my free account. Yes, sir. Yeah, so if you recall, here is my URL, and let me zoom in again. And if you recall, there's two portions to it. There is my application key, which is specified here, and then this is my Azure subscription key that goes along with it. So if I have another Azure subscription, I can just simply attach it onto it, and I'd be able to use it. You would essentially give them this key to that app, and then obviously rights to the portal. So you want to share it amongst different customers? So if you want to sell it to one customer, you would give away this key. They would have ownership of it, and then they can change that key in the app, in the portal. You want to sell it to a second customer, so from there you'd have to essentially recreate the app. Should be a way to copy that with the model. So you copy it from one app into the other. I mean, because everyone's going to be a little bit different, so you'd have to retrain it. Yeah. Yes, sir. So in version 2, which is what I'm using here, you'd have to set it up as two different cultures under two different models. And the caveat is, and we'll talk about this in just a little bit, once you set up a culture, you're pretty much stuck with it in that model. That's for version 2. Version 3, on the other hand, dynamically allows you to add in different languages, and it will do the auto-translate for you. Pretty slick that way. Now here are all my intents, and intentionally I had done two intents that sound very similar. There is the find car, and then there's the buy car, right? And if we notice, I have different utterances underneath each one. So ideally, it would make sense to combine them all into one. So what I could do in the portal, I could go under Find Car, and then I can select all three, and then I can specify that I want to reassign the intent of them, that I want them to be all under By Car. So I click that, and now they're reassigned under By Car. When I go back into my intents, here is By Car, and here are all the intentions. Now, what do I need to do? I see all these low scores. Train. Sorry? In this case, yeah. I mean, obviously, more phrases, it's going to take longer to train. Because it's not just looking for that phrase alone, it's looking for phrases that are similar to it. And hence, that's the training process. So, while that's chugging, you have a question? Yeah, and I'll touch on that in an upcoming slide. But the short answer is yes. You can have different hierarchicals within a specific entity. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. So I have my training had failed. And let's see, Find Car, few labels. I'm sorry? Right. So if I go back into my intents, there's Find Car that has 0, and I can choose to delete that. And then we go back under By Car, and we'll go ahead and retrain the model again. Essentially what I wanted to show is that you can move utterances from one intent into the other rather easily. All your work is essentially done in this portal, and then after you get everything set up in this model, you just make an API call through the app to access it. So to expand on Brian's question about entity types, so the ones that I had used were very basic, very simple single nouns. Mustang, Explorer. However, the types can be hierarchical. So for example, for a specific Mustang, it comes in a variety of different editions. The GT, the Cobra, the Mach. In addition, I can have composite entities. So now I'm talking about a Mustang, and that's a GT, and is also the convertible model. So there are multiple items that I'm specifying there. I can also have a finite list of synonyms or related words. So for example, again, in my car dealership, I'm going to have an Explorer, a Mustang, and an Expedition. I'm certainly not going to have a Cadillac there. I'm not going to have a Mercedes there, right? It's a Ford dealership. I'm only going to have Ford models. In addition, with languages, as I mentioned before, once you set a language in version 2, you're pretty much stuck with that culture. If you develop an app in version 3, it does the auto-translate for you dynamically. We were able to create a model and then retrain it, but there's also pre-built models that are available. Those things such as that offer dates. Sorry, that is a very small font. But essentially, things that we're all familiar with. Date, time, money, age, geography, all these different things that are finite and are not changing, we can use the model to incorporate that in our app. For managing the Lewis app, essentially you would monitor the app using the dashboard, and you could take a look at the usage and the intents. And as we had seen earlier, if I go back into my manage, actually let's go back into the dashboard. There it is. So it's loading, and it's going to give me a graph of the usage and the number of hits, and then I can take a look at the individual utterances and see what the confidence score is for all of them. Notice that now, after I've retrained it, I'm getting a much higher score for all these items. So again, I would use the portal for managing everything regarding the app, for finding the usage, the intents targeted. I can use it to manage the keys that I'm referring to the app. So as Steve mentioned, if I want to sell my application, they can take it and then they can modify the key and use it there. I can also use for batch testing, where I can upload a set of intents and utterances. I would upload a set of utterances and then tie them to a specific intent all through batch. And with batch, it's essentially an array of utterances in JSON format, where the entity indices would be supplied using the character count. So I'm specifying where the entity is located in the same manner that it had responded when it showed me that Mustang was start index 13 and end index 19. One note, entities are not allowed to start or end in the middle of a word. So essentially, it has to be a word by itself. It cannot be in the middle of a word. And when you're doing batch testing, keep in mind that there's a maximum of 1,000 utterances per batch. It's a lot of JSON typing and formatting right there. Some gotchas that I always like to share. So you must have an Azure subscription prior to logging into Lewis.ai. Otherwise, you won't be able to see the top navigation bar in Lewis. Don't forget to publish your app after training it, as we mentioned before. And also, with culture, if you're using V2 or if you've inherited an application in V2, once the culture has been set, you're pretty much stuck with it. You have to create another app with a different culture to handle different languages. Version 3 is much more dynamic, where it does the auto-translation. Also, there's a delay in the dashboard metrics. So I've noticed that there's approximately a roughly 6 to 12 hour delay in when the metrics are published on the dashboard. And last but not least, for the Bing Speech API, use a WebRTC compatible browser. What this means is there's a web compatible browser that uses Lewis. Even though Lewis is made by Microsoft, for Microsoft, it doesn't work in Internet Explorer, nor did it work in Edge. That's what I said. So you got to use Chrome in order for it to be able to utilize that technology. Sorry? Maybe now in Edge, yeah, but before it didn't. Sure. So, any questions? None at all? Clear as a whistle? Caffeine's kicked in. We've digested everything, right? Okay, so let's do a little recap. What have we covered here today? Lewis is pretty cool. What can I do with Lewis other than look cool? Sorry? Send it a string and do what? It'll answer my string. It'll tell me what my intent of my... Correct. So it tells me what the intention of the user, what they entered. What can I do with that? Big deal. I found out the user wants to buy a car. What now? I can create... Right, so in my code, as we had seen, I have a switch statement. And if I find out that they're looking for a car, I can say, Mr. Buyer, here are all the different cars that we have in stock. Which one would you like to see? So it creates for a richer experience and can also be piggybacked on using with bots. So we talked about what Lewis is, how we can create an app. What do I need to do to in my app to call Lewis? I'm sorry? So that's in the Lewis itself, but now I created my .NET application. How can I call Lewis? Sorry? So I create my app, it's published. Now I'm working in .NET only. What do I do in .NET to call Lewis? You're all right. You're all correct. A REST API call, right? A REST API call, and because it's an API call, it has to be asynchronous. So I have an asynchronous handler to handle that once it responds. What are some of the gotchas that we talked about? Sorry. Create an Azure account, otherwise I won't see the top nav bar. What else? Don't use Azure? Edge, okay. What else? Very good. So the entity has to be by itself, can't be in the middle of a word or at the end of a word. And publish, don't forget to publish, right. Sorry? I can't hear you. Oh, yeah, right. And if you're selling it like Steve is intending to, you gotta collect the money first. Very good. Okay, some references. Microsoft Docs has some great write-ups and great tutorials on this. Also, the application and the PowerPoint will be published later, and I'll send you links on that. Also, I invite you to look at NIS Technologies, where we offer courses in cognitive services. This is part of that. So feel free to check us out, nistechnologies.com. And last but not least, as the magical slide or Jiffy over on the right-hand side says, I have business cards up here. There was someone that I need to get back to about a question. I forgot who that was. Okay. If you have any other questions, feel free to grab a card. I'd be happy to touch base with you later. My email, snasr@nistechnologies. You can also find me on Twitter, and I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn. And then at the end of the day, I'll have all the links to the slides and videos and code demos available on my blog, samnasr.blogspot.com. And we have one last question. Yes, sir. Yeah. The Cleveland C# VB.NET user group. Rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? The study group? Yeah, so I'll take that offline with you. But essentially, I want to thank you all for attending. Please keep in mind, there's still plenty of breakfast items outside. Help yourselves. We're going to take a 15-minute break, and then we'll pick up again at 10:30 with Matt Gordon and sentiment analysis. Thank you.